Life Stories brings you a powerful tale of courage, resilience, and the fight against prejudice. Today, we follow the journey of Agent Marcus Johnson, a dedicated Secret Service officer whose quiet strength is tested in the face of injustice. On what should have been a routine mission, Marcus encounters an ordeal that challenges not only his professionalism but also the assumptions and biases of those around him. This is a story of standing tall, even when the odds seem stacked against you. Subscribe to our channel and join us as we begin today's compelling story with Life Stories. It started as an ordinary day in the life of Agent Marcus Johnson, a skilled member of the Secret Service tasked with protecting some of the most powerful people in the world. Marcus, with his calm demeanor and sharp instincts, was accustomed to blending into the background, ensuring his presence went unnoticed as he carried out his duties. On this day, he had been assigned to protect the president on a commercial flight. It was an unusual choice for such a high-profile figure, but Marcus trusted the meticulous planning of his agency. His role was clear: remain inconspicuous while ensuring the president's safety. Dressed in plain clothes and seated near the back of the plane, Marcus surveyed his surroundings. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes never stopped moving, scanning every passenger as they boarded. He adjusted his position slightly, ensuring his holstered firearm was concealed beneath his jacket. It was standard protocol for agents, even in civilian environments. The cabin filled with the usual mix of travelers, families, business people, and occasional solo flyers. To anyone else, this was a routine flight, but Marcus felt the weight of his responsibility keenly. As the final passengers settled into their seats, two uniformed police officers, Officer Miller and Officer Carter, entered the plane. They moved with purpose, their sharp eyes scanning the cabin. Marcus noticed them immediately, his training attuned to identifying any potential disruptions. But what he didn't anticipate was their focus shifting entirely to him. As their gazes lingered, he felt the familiar, unsettling sensation of being scrutinized not as a professional, but as a black man who seemed, to them, out of place. The officers exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Marcus had seen this look before: the silent exchange of assumptions that often led to misunderstanding and confrontation. He remained calm, unwilling to let their stares rattle him. He had a job to do, and he wouldn't let their biases distract him from his mission. Minutes passed, but the officers' unease seemed to grow. Their eyes flicked to him repeatedly, and their whispered conversation carried a tone of certainty, as if they were convincing themselves of a narrative that had no basis in reality. Marcus, ever the professional, focused on his task, though he couldn't ignore the tension building behind him. When the officers finally stood and approached him, their stances were stiff, their expressions guarded. "Sir, can we see some ID?" Officer Miller's tone was clipped, almost accusatory. Marcus looked up, meeting his gaze with calm resolve. He reached slowly for his identification, aware that any sudden movement could escalate the situation. "I'm with the Secret Service," he said evenly, holding out his credentials. "I'm on official duty." Instead of diffusing the tension, his response seemed to fuel their disbelief. Officer Carter scoffed, his skepticism evident. "Secret Service? Sure," he muttered, his hand drifting toward his own holstered weapon. "And what exactly are you doing on this flight?" "I'm here on assignment," Marcus replied, keeping his tone neutral. He could see the disbelief in their eyes, the unspoken assumptions clouding their judgment. When he shifted slightly in his seat, Carter's gaze dropped to Marcus's leg, where the outline of his firearm was barely visible beneath his jacket. Carter's face twisted with alarm. "He's got a gun," Carter exclaimed, his voice rising above the hum of the cabin. Passengers turned in their seats, their murmurs of confusion growing louder. Marcus raised his hands slowly, his movements deliberate. "Please," he began, his voice steady but firm. "I'm authorized to carry this weapon." "I'm here to protect the president. Let me explain." But his words fell on deaf ears. The officers had already drawn their weapons, their fear overpowering any rational thought. "Get down on the ground," Miller barked, his tone harsh and commanding. The cabin erupted into chaos. Some passengers ducked instinctively, while others stared wide-eyed at the unfolding scene. Marcus, understanding the gravity of the situation, complied without resistance. He lowered himself to the floor, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. As Miller and Carter restrained him, roughly twisting his arms behind his back, Marcus felt the cold bite of handcuffs against his wrists. Frustration and humiliation surged within him, but he remained silent, knowing that any protest could make matters worse. The officers searched him thoroughly, confiscating his badge and weapon. They handled his credentials carelessly, too consumed by their assumptions to examine them closely. The whispers among the passengers grew louder as Marcus was hauled to his feet. His shoulders ached from the force of their grip, but he kept his expression neutral. He could feel the weight of their judgmental stares, the fear and uncertainty written on their faces. He wanted to tell them the truth, that he was no threat, that he was there to ensure their safety, but the officers gave him no opportunity to speak. As they escorted him off the plane, Marcus's heart sank. His absence could jeopardize the president's safety, and every second he spent in custody heightened the risk. The humiliation of being treated like a criminal stung deeply, but it was the larger implications of the situation that weighed on him the most. He had dedicated his life to protecting others. Yet in this moment, his identity and purpose were overshadowed by prejudice and fear. Walking through the terminal, flanked by the officers, Marcus maintained his composure. He had endured worse in his life, but the injustice of this moment cut deeply. He hoped, no, he trusted that the truth would come to light. For now, all he could do was wait. In the sterile confines of the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport security office, Marcus Johnson sat in a cold metal chair, his wrists cuffed tightly behind his back. The room was dimly lit, its grey walls and faint hum of the air conditioning doing little to ease the tension that hung thick in the air. Officers Miller and Carter stood a few feet away, their postures rigid as they exchanged quiet, self-assured whispers. To them, the case was closed. They believed they had apprehended a dangerous individual, someone who, in their minds, posed an immediate threat. But Marcus was no threat. He was a protector, a man whose purpose was to shield others from harm, even those who now treated him as if he were a criminal. Despite the frustration churning within him, Marcus maintained his composure. He knew that anger would only deepen their conviction, feeding the prejudices that had already clouded their judgment. The moments stretched into minutes, the silence between the three men broken only by the occasional sharp clatter of keys or the shuffle of papers. Marcus finally broke the tension, his voice calm but firm. "You're making a serious mistake. I'm a Secret Service agent on duty, and my absence is compromising the safety of the president." Officer Carter scoffed, leaning against the table with a casual arrogance that set Marcus's teeth on edge. "Save it," Carter said, his tone dismissive. "We've heard enough stories to know when someone's lying." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to breathe deeply. Every part of him wanted to lash out, to demand that they check his credentials. But he knew better. Patience, he reminded himself. The truth would come out eventually. Meanwhile, back on the plane, the absence of Agent Johnson had not gone unnoticed. Among the Secret Service team, Marcus's disappearance was immediately flagged as a critical concern. His position on the flight was not arbitrary, it had been carefully calculated to ensure the president's safety. When the senior agent on board realized Marcus was missing, a ripple of alarm spread through the team. The president, preparing to board, was quickly informed. The news hit the president with a mix of frustration and unease. Marcus was one of his most trusted agents, a man known for his unwavering dedication and professionalism. To think he had been removed from the plane, accused of being a threat, was both laughable and infuriating. The president, however, did not let his anger show. Instead, he took a deep breath. His tone measured as he issued a clear order: hold the flight. I'm going to the security office myself. Inside the security office, Marcus watched as officers Miller and Carter continued to rifle through his belongings. They handled his badge as though it were a cheap trinket, their skepticism unwavering. Marcus couldn't help but feel the sting of their dismissal. His badge, a symbol of his years of hard work and dedication, meant nothing to them. They saw only the color of his skin and the assumptions they had built around it. As time dragged on, Marcus's thoughts turned to the president. His absence left a glaring gap in the protective detail, one that could have devastating consequences. He prayed that his team could adapt quickly, ensuring the president's safety in his stead. Yet, despite his training and his stoic exterior, a sense of helplessness gnawed at him. He had faced countless dangers in his career, but none had felt as isolating as this moment. The sound of hurried footsteps broke through his thoughts. The door to the office swung open, and in walked the president, flanked by his chief of staff and several senior Secret Service agents. The room seemed to shrink under the weight of their presence. Officers Miller and Carter froze, their self-assured demeanor crumbling as they registered the gravity of the situation. "Where is Agent Johnson?" the president demanded, his voice cold and precise. His piercing gaze moved from Miller to Carter, who exchanged a panicked glance. The authority in the president's tone left no room for deflection. Miller hesitated before responding, his voice faltering. "We apprehended a suspect claiming to be Secret Service, sir." The president stepped forward, his expression darkening. "That suspect, as you call him, is one of my most trusted agents. Did you check his credentials?" Carter stammered. "Well, we thought." "You didn't think," the president cut him off, his voice like steel. He gestured toward an aide, who handed over Marcus's confiscated badge. "This is a Secret Service badge. Did it never occur to you to verify it before you made your assumptions?" The room fell silent. The weight of the president's words hung in the air, and the realization of their mistake hit the officers like a tidal wave. Their confidence shattered, replaced by a mix of shame and disbelief. Marcus, still bound to the chair, remained quiet, watching as the truth finally began to surface. Turning to the chief of staff, the president gave a firm nod. "Get Agent Johnson out of those cuffs. Now." The aide moved quickly, unlocking the restraints and helping Marcus to his feet. Despite the physical discomfort and emotional strain he had endured, Marcus straightened his posture, meeting the president's eyes with a quiet resolve. "Thank you, sir," Marcus said simply, his tone steady but tinged with exhaustion. The president placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've been through enough. Let's get back to the plane." As Marcus prepared to leave, he turned back to officers Miller and Carter. Their faces were pale, their confidence gone. For the first time, they seemed to truly see the man they had wronged, not the caricature they had imagined. Marcus's expression remained composed, but his eyes held a message they couldn't ignore: there would be no forgetting what had happened here. To Marcus, this was not just about his own dignity, it was about ensuring that this kind of injustice would not happen again. As Marcus followed the president and his team out of the security office, a sense of relief washed over him. He was free, but the ordeal still weighed heavily on his mind. The cold reality of what had just happened, being judged and humiliated because of assumptions rooted in prejudice, was a burden he could not simply shrug off. Though his exterior remained composed, his thoughts churned with frustration and exhaustion. His focus, however, remained sharp. There was still a job to do, and his absence had already compromised the president's security for far too long. The walk back through the terminal was a surreal experience. Passers-by turned to watch the group, their expressions ranging from curiosity to confusion. Marcus held his head high, his posture a reflection of the professionalism he maintained even under duress. The president walked beside him, a steadying presence. It was a silent but powerful gesture of solidarity, a recognition of Marcus's unwavering commitment despite the humiliation he had endured. Once back on the plane, the atmosphere among the passengers was noticeably tense. Whispers rippled through the cabin as Marcus re-entered. Some passengers looked at him with a mix of curiosity and sympathy, others averted their gaze, perhaps embarrassed by their earlier assumptions. The president's visible support seemed to shift the narrative. As Marcus returned to his seat, a few passengers offered small nods of respect. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind him why he did what he did. His mission was bigger than the biases he faced, it was about protecting everyone, even those who misjudged him. Meanwhile, back in the security office, Officers Miller and Carter remained rooted to the spot, their confidence shattered by the president's reprimand. The weight of their mistake hung heavily in the air, and the stark reality of their actions was impossible to ignore. For the first time, they began to grapple with the consequences of their biases, not just the harm they had caused Marcus but also the risk they had introduced to the very people they were sworn to protect. Miller broke the silence, his voice subdued. We didn't think it through." Carter nodded, his expression grim. "We let our assumptions get the better of us. That's on us." Their words were met with a pointed silence from the president's staff, who had remained behind to ensure the situation was fully resolved. One of the senior Secret Service agents, a stern figure with years of experience, stepped forward. "Assumptions have no place in this line of work," he said firmly. "What you did today wasn't just reckless, it was dangerous. You endangered the life of the president and everyone on that flight because you couldn't look past your own biases." The officers nodded, shame evident in their expressions. They understood now that their actions had far-reaching consequences, ones that extended beyond their own narrow perspectives. It was a harsh but necessary lesson, one they would carry with them long after this moment. Back on the plane, the flight crew worked quickly to finalize preparations. Marcus resumed his position, his senses attuned once again to his surroundings. Despite the turbulence of the day, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. His role wasn't just about physical protection, it was about standing against the forces that sought to divide and devalue. For Marcus, this moment was a reminder of why he had chosen to serve, to uphold justice, even when it felt like the odds were stacked against him. As the plane finally took off, the president approached Marcus, his expression a mix of gratitude and determination. "Agent Johnson," he began, his voice low but firm, "what happened today should never have occurred. You deserve better than this." Marcus nodded, his tone measured but sincere. "Thank you, sir. It means a lot coming from you." The president placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, a gesture of both apology and respect. "We have a lot of work to do, not just in protecting this country but in addressing the kind of prejudice that led to this situation. What you endured today won't be forgotten." Marcus appreciated the words, though he knew the road ahead would be long. Change wasn't something that happened overnight. But moments like these, moments of acknowledgement and accountability, were steps in the right direction. As the flight settled into its routine, Marcus allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The events of the day had left their mark, but they had also strengthened his resolve. He would continue to do his job with the same quiet dedication, knowing that his actions spoke louder than any assumptions made about him. In the security office, Miller and Carter sat in heavy silence, replaying the president's words in their minds. Their regret was palpable, but so too was a newfound understanding. They had been given a second chance, not just to atone for their mistake but to ensure it wouldn't happen again. It was a lesson they would carry forward, one that would shape how they approached their roles in the future. For Marcus, the journey wasn't over, but as he glanced out the window, the horizon stretching out before him, he felt a quiet sense of hope. This was his calling, to protect, to endure, and to lead by example. And despite the challenges, he knew he would rise to meet it every time. As the plane soared above the clouds, Agent Marcus Johnson sat silently, gazing out the window. The events of the day had left him bruised, but not broken. Despite the humiliation and injustice he had faced, Marcus knew that his purpose was greater than the prejudices of a few. He carried with him a quiet strength and a commitment to ensuring that no one, whether a president or an everyday citizen, would face harm on his watch. The lesson from this day extended beyond him, touching everyone involved. It was a reminder of the power of empathy, accountability, and the courage to confront our own biases. For Marcus, it was another step in the journey of service and resilience. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more thought-provoking and heartfelt tales. Thank you for watching.